Okay, we'll get rolling. Welcome everyone. Thank you for dialing in tonight to the latest episode of the 2024 State of Play series. For those of you on Zoom, you'll probably see a notification about the meeting being recorded. Please just click OK or agree to continue. And firstly, an acknowledgement of country. MND Australia acknowledges the traditional owners, traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and future and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. And I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people on whose land I am and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging and extend a welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples on this call today. So tonight, we're going to hear about something perhaps at first glance is a somewhat dry subject, that's data. But what we'll hear about tonight is how critical this data collection is to inform both research and care, and how the better we can make our data collection, the closer we'll move towards better treatments and quality of life for people living with MND. Tonight, we have two presenters who have played leading roles in moving MND data collection forward in Australia. Paul Talman is a neurologist from the Geelong MND Clinic and Deakin University, and he established the Australian MND Registry, which forms the basis of much of the information we know about MND patients in Australia. Anjali Henders is based in the Human Studies Unit at the University of Queensland and has been absolutely integral in developing both SALSA and MiNDAUS as the two largest MND data initiatives currently underway in Australia. So at the end of this evening, we will certainly have a much better understanding of what data can do. As previously, each presenter will talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a combined Q&A session at the end. Please submit any of your questions through the chat or Q&A function if you're on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, you can submit your questions through the comments. And you don't need to wait to the end. If you have a question, fire it through as soon as you think about it, so you don't forget about it. And then we'll collate all the questions and make sure we ask them in the discussion at the end. So I think, Paul, you're up first. So take it away. Sorry, Paul, you're on mute.
Sorry. I was just saying thank you for the invitation to present at the webinar, and I'd also like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people who are custodians of the land that I live on in Aries Inlet in Victoria. I'm going to just a sec, just need to change something. Talk today, what up here is what we'll cover. So data matters, and it's always what MiNDAUS actually is. Some discussion about the legacy data from the Australian MND Registry that we had in place between 2004 and 2018, and then our current and future state and aspirations. Just to highlight data, this is really current as of the start of this month. Real world evidence on the treatment, retention and safety of Edaravone, which is going to be, well, it's PBS listed in Australia for use, an intravenous form of infusion. And this is a registry in the United States and Canada, actually, where they were studying the real world demographics and characteristics of Edaravone treated patients. That is, who was the drug getting to, where were they located, did they continue with it, how long did they continue with it, and were there any adverse outcomes? So this is in real time on a drug that's got through an approval process but still requires monitoring. And the evidence that it generates helps inform some of the really important requirements patients have to engage in that type of therapy. And for a second, I just would like you to imagine, and this is a rather busy slide, but it's worth starting with. What data is going to be important in MND, or is important in MND? You see up the top specified clinical data. That's stuff that the clinicians log and keep to track patients and their disease location and progression and their needs. But also, we've come to understand how valuable patient-entered data is. So if you had something that could house all that everybody could look at, and you combined it with home-based monitoring or voice analysis, plasmography, which is respiratory function, body weight, movement analysis, you can see that you'd start to get a real-time picture of what patients actually look like. If you then can imagine that data turning into a care navigator, so that anybody that's looking at that data could look at the diagnostic criteria, which we use for various staging of the disease, functional rating scales, breathing, milestones, key milestones in disease progression, according to the King's and MiNDAUS staging systems, when PEGs went in, when NIV started, when any treatment started, current medications, and any trial enrolments. We're starting to build a very complete picture of any one individual. But the key here is also patients and carers entering information. That also then, if you put all that together, not only do you have something where you've got a care navigator, which you can use in real time to help patients and understand where they are in disease, but you can also then use that aggregated data for third-party investigators through various research agreements, as long as it's gone through a centralised governance committee. So this is an imagined of what data might look like, how it might be collected. The question is, how do you get to something like this? How do you create a registry of information that's accessible, no matter where you are in the country, home, in the GP's office, in a hospital setting, in a specialist clinic? So that's sort of where we've been in this zone. We've been thinking about this for quite some time. So what is MiNDAUS? Firstly, this project team commenced with a grant from the National Health and Medical Research Council in 2018. It combined a lot of the key players in MND around Australia. MNDA, specialist teams and that were involved in the original registry, people and carers with MND, biobanks, and healthcare researchers, all in one group, as many of the stakeholders we could get in one place to look at registries. But the title is key: evidence driving policy. You don't get evidence without data. You need good, verifiable data to be able to create evidence, and from evidence you can then go and influence government policy and funding. So around Australia, we had established in 2003 actually. We've grown since then specialised clinics, multidisciplinary clinics who all participate in data collection, both in clinical trials, but also in the National Registry, from Rob Henderson and Anthony Winkle up in Queensland, right through to Merrilee Needham and Dev Nathani in WA, and not forgetting Lauren Giles in Tasmania. So I just want to be clear, what's the difference between a registry and a clinical trial? And it's worth going through it. So the registry collects information about individuals during normal care, whereas a clinical trial is a controlled experiment. The registry runs indefinitely. A clinical trial has a fixed duration. All individuals with a diagnosis of MND are eligible for a registry, and clinical trials have very specific eligibility according to the drug and substance, and also disease progression rates. All of those sort of things are taken into account. So there are exclusions in trials. Information is collected in registries during normal routine visits. It's part of normal care. The information is entered into the registry ongoing, and clinical trials have very specific set schedules of visits. We don't have any intervention in a registry. It's usual treatment. We log everything, whereas in a trial, it's very specific treatments. The data that we have is used to improve clinical practice and disease understanding, and to collaborate with other researchers who might find that information valuable in their own research. Whereas in a clinical trial, data is analysed to determine the treatment efficiency and effect on MND. So if you look at it this way, the MiNDAUS registry was designed so that it's a design. We had to write new software in open source programming to do this, and that was through Matthew Bellegarde at Queensland University of Technology. It's been ethically reviewed and approved. It's compliant with Australian privacy laws and is highly secure. The important thing that we added to this registry, understanding that there was a real need for patients and carers to actually keep a log of their own information if they wanted to. It enabled them to consent to various other research studies and data sharing, that we would share their data. That's managed by patients and carers. It's easily updated and it's easily shared. So they were the premise on which we built this registry. Understanding that any sharing of data outside of the registry is de-identified. What do we collect? So on the clinician side of the registry, we date of diagnosis, date and site of symptom onset, family history, rating scales. We also collect, very importantly, the clinical signs, where the disease is, what it's affecting, and if we do subsequent visits, we update that information to see where the disease is progressing, along with respiratory function and key metrics, dates of treatment commencement, like PEG tube insertions or non-invasive ventilation. These are all really important parameters that are signposts to disease progression, but also it gives us the ability to see what's working in real time, in real life. The personal data, we've enabled this data platform to be used for patients identifying their needs, so that when you go in there, you can see it. It's, I have problems with my communication and what they are, what medicines they're taking, dietary preference requirements, life story, life history, personal life history, preferences for positioning, symptoms, all the sorts of things that are impacting somebody with MND, and indeed the people that are looking after them, caring for them. So what we've came up with after a lot of work, groundwork, was the registry, the data platform that can be shared between the clinic and the patient. Patients can see the clinical data. We can see the patient data. We can't change the patient data. They can't change the clinical data, but it's shared. It sits in the cloud and it's accessible from anywhere. We provide data for the SALSA, who we're going to hear about, the genomics platform, which is really important. And probably the future of discovery in MND is going to be in genomic and omic analysis in general. We can analyse our patients to see who's ready, who would be appropriate for various trials. We can look at survival curves, key milestones. It assists in the creation of clinical guidelines and care, which then we can use to advise government to provide better service provision. So that's the basis on which we proceeded. The problem that we faced was, how do we get the data? At the moment, the data is entered through the various specialist clinics or by patients themselves. Clearly, hospital systems around Australia are all different. They're silos of data, and it's not really possible to develop application programmable interfaces to suck that data out of hospital systems. So we decided that the best way, because of the difficulty with this disease, is to actually have the data stored in the cloud, accessible from anywhere, from the hospital, from the home, from the clinic. And it has to be transparent to patients and carers. We've started with the new platform, and so far we've registered 572 individuals in the new registry. And this is the breakdown by state of where those patients are being registered. Tasmania's only recently come online. We're developing another clinic in New South Wales, and these are patients that have been allocated to the various specialist clinics. We have a large number of patients that are not allocated to any clinic in particular, where patients have self-registered and haven't declared or set the clinic that they're going to. In September, we had there's a first visit data platform, and then there's any subsequent visits. And so we've had patients, at least 131 that have had at least data collected on multiple occasions, and 245 with comprehensive first visit data. So that's where we are with the current data set. Now, that information is used in all sorts of ways, but it helps inform guidelines, compliance, who's taking medications, whether they've ceased taking medications because of side effects. All of that information is being held in the registry. And all of that information can be used to inform policies and also guidelines, and also argue with health departments about service needs. I'll just cover the legacy data set that was collected. We call it legacy because it's now the Amanda data set's no longer operating, but we have a data set from there where we collected information between 2004 and 2018, roughly, 2020, in South Australia, where we collected information on over 3,000 patients. And that registry is what we use to form the basis to develop the MiNDAUS registry. We've published information about the clinical subtypes, phenotypes in the Australian population, and how those different phenotypes, how they differed in their rates of progression. So again, this is again from around Australia, the sites that were participating. We also had some international sites participating at the University of Malaysia as a pilot to see whether or not we could extend this into Southeast Asia. The types of information, and this is in a publication from the legacy data set, we looked at the number of cases, how they were defined as in the Ellis-Scourial classification system, whether they were face onset, arm onset, or limb onset, or indeed flail arm or flail leg, or whether they couldn't be differentiated into one of those categories, or primary lateral sclerosis. So we were able to classify a substantive number of patients, and they behave differently and they progress differently. And that's in a publication in the British Medical Journal from 2016. We also can look at survival curves, depending on the different types. And this is the aggregated data from the legacy data set. We haven't repeated this at the moment, but you can see that primary lateral sclerosis survived a very long time, whereas bulbar onset and indeed get into trouble very quickly in the disease over 40 to 45 months. So where are we? And what's our current and future state going to look like? At the top of that list is ensure future funding. Registries, especially in rare or uncommon diseases, are notoriously difficult to fund. There is no funding stream for them. It's difficult for government to partition funds for a registry that doesn't impact on a vast number of people in the population. We certainly are at the place where we can call ourselves a clinical quality registry. That requires that you feed back outcomes back to clinics to see how they compare to other clinics to make sure the standards of care are uniform and people are adhering to guidelines. We could incorporate telehealth into a registry so that the information seamlessly incorporated using telehealth. The big thing which we could currently do is linking to home-based monitoring. Now, there are various devices where we could monitor patients' health and well-being at home, and that information, like NIV, that information is transferred to the cloud, the usage of that. And if we created a programmable interface, that information could automatically be brought down into the registry, and you'd get a very good understanding of how often NIV is used, pressures, all of those sort of things. So home-based monitoring is possible. In essence, what we're creating is a dynamic health record that can be accessed anywhere, no matter whether you're in the clinic, specialist clinic, or at your GPs, or even at home with support workers who are visiting to take care of individuals. The other thing that we can do is we can data link to other research programs and other collection systems like the genomic system. So we envisage that we will link to researchers. They have to put a proposal in. It has to be ethically approved. We've done this a couple of times for the current data set. We have a legal agreement. The data is supplied securely and de-identified, and the researcher complies with any imposed conditions and acknowledges the source of the data. The second scenario is in clinical trials, where in real life we might monitor the use of a new drug. Again, that has to be approved by a governance committee. The research is filtered to the individuals that might be suitable, subject to their consent. Individuals can be contacted with details of that we're monitoring the trial, the drug that they've been placed on in real time. So that brings us back to what we're envisaging MiNDAUS will be. Certainly at the moment, we've got the top tier working. We don't have a care navigator or the real-time clinical metrics. We do have research agreements with third parties, and we don't have the home-based monitoring. All of that requires separate bundles of funding to be able to do that, and is subject to applications to the NHMRC or the Medical Research Future Fund, which are notoriously difficult to get funded. 2% of applications are funded. And we've been writing those grants now over 5 years. We've been successful on 2 or 3 occasions to get money. So part of what we've got to do to really enact the vision that we propose is find a stable, guaranteed source of funding that enables us to develop this registry in a way that's going to be meaningful primarily for patients and carers, so that they're getting something from participating in the registry at the clinical interface, and we can supply really good quality information for people monitoring various aspects of care, or a new drug that's been listed on the PBS to see what the uptake of that drug is, any adverse outcomes. But also in the clinic, having a clinic care navigator that pops up is immediately populated in real time by data that is being put in by both patients and carers and at the clinics themselves. So that's the vision, and it's all based around having the ability to properly fund a registry. And you do this bit by bit, adding piece by piece as that funding becomes available. I do want to acknowledge that Lanny Haverkamp and Stan Appel from Baylor College in Houston, Texas, who I went and visited in 1998. And Lanny Haverkamp really was the first person to ever develop a local registry in Houston, Texas. And he had the vision. He understood immediately what the value of that would be in identifying covariates of survival and patients at risk that needed more careful care. So he understood it, but it's been an eon of time since then. And again, what it goes to is the difficulty of funding this type of infrastructure. Again, finish on just the NHMRC partnership that initiated this new development for us. There are a lot of people on that list, and they all are duly acknowledged for their input. I'd also like to single out Keith Malpress, Richard Naguri, Peter Ruddock, and for their direct input from a patient and carer perspective, also the Thomas Research Group, who also put in a lot of finances and also a lot of input into how this registry should look. But it was from this broad church of people involved in MND care at various levels that we were able to at least get this far and have a functioning online registry, which we hope, as I mentioned, to further develop. So I'll stop sharing at that moment. Stop sharing. And I'm going to hand over to Anjali, who's going to talk to you about the SALSA group.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that. I'll just share my screen. Can someone just let me know that that's come through?
That's all good, Anjali.
Great, thank you. So good evening, everybody, and it's really lovely to have the opportunity to present today, and thank you very much to MNDRA who extended this invitation to us. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I'm presenting from today here in Meanjin in Brisbane, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today does certainly overlap with a lot of what Paul has already talked about, but I think it is important to go through some of the unique features of the SALSA consortium and how it came to be, and how it really does provide a very natural collaboration with the MiNDAUS partnership, and certainly with a lot of other research programs that are happening in Australia. So the SALSA Systems Genomics Consortium was funded by the initial Ice Bucket Challenge that swept the world in about 2014. And so we've been going for about 8 years now. And so what I'd like to do this evening is to provide an overview of the consortium, who we are, how the protocol actually works, and how we engage with the research groups. So really the primary aim of SALSA was to establish this clinical data and biological ready resource that was most importantly reflective of the MND cohort here in Australia. So although the cohort itself, although the consortium itself doesn't have our own research projects that we progress, we certainly provide a lot of support to the research community here in Australia and overseas. And we do that by providing this infrastructure to invite people to participate in the project, collect data, and collect biological samples. So I'd also like to take the time now just to thank those organisations that support SALSA. That includes Fight MND, MND Research Australia, and the NHMRC. So SALSA essentially is a group of clinicians and researchers around the country, plus a team of international MND experts. And so these are collaborators from the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. And it really brings together all of these people with very specific expertise across a number of domains to really try and understand this underlying complexity that is MND. So the SALSA program currently runs at 8 research and clinical sites, and we're always looking at ways, and we're certainly looking at ways that we can reach out to those people living with MND in regional and remote parts of Australia as well. So just to take you through the SALSA protocol. So again, this maps very neatly onto the MiNDAUS slide that Paul had, where we collect both clinical information and lifestyle information, as well as a biological sample. And so we do this every 3 months for as long as a participant is happy to participate in the project, and certainly as long as they are physically able to do that. The clinical information that we collect is an agreed data set that's consistent with MiNDAUS, and MiNDAUS and SALSA have worked very closely on this, but also very importantly, it's harmonised with other clinical data sets that are being collected internationally, and particularly in the UK and Europe. So across every clinical visit, we collect about 200 pieces of independent data, and also we collect the biological samples, which for the most part are a blood sample. Those samples are processed, and derivatives of those samples are used to generate genetic information and omic information. So this is other types of information that come from your blood sample, as well as developing this resource of longitudinal samples that would be useful in tracking and tracing biomarkers. So the central theme of systems genomics is to integrate genetic information and other omic data to really try and disentangle this complexity of the biological processes that drive motor neuron disease. So one of the things that is really important, and also MiNDAUS spent a lot of time making sure that we had this done very well, was to ensure that we had developed a really robust research governance framework. And by that, I mean, administratively, we had to develop a framework in a way that it would work, where we would engage participants, the clinical sites, the hospitals, and also work with each other, that not only covered off all of the human ethics requirements that we have, but also to manage all the legal complexities as well. So we do that by having essentially 3 tiers of involvement. So for participants, they manage their informed consent to the project and their ownership of their sample with respect to ongoing inclusion in the consortium. Can we still keep using data and samples? At the site level, whether it be the clinical site or a research group that's located at a university, the principal investigators or the researchers have access to the data and sample collections that they're amassing, and they can also share that data set themselves with their own collaborators, but also use it to progress their own work. And at the top level, which is the consortium itself, it manages this independent ownership of the data and samples across the site. And so by combining these 3 levels of participation, we built this model where the primary data and the biological samples are owned by the contributors, but it's also managed centrally. And any generation of data that comes from the derived parts of the sample or summaries from the data is also retained as well. So it's quite a complicated process, but as Paul said, we've worked really hard to make sure that when people consent, that they can participate to their fullest, and also we make sure that every bit of information that we collect and biological sample we collect is used and can be used appropriately. So where are we at? Sorry, that just didn't. Maybe I did the way. So, so where are we at right now? So this is a bit of a snapshot of numbers. So we have recruited now over 1,000 cases, and there's clinical data from just under 1,200 individuals, biological samples of 1,162, and just over 1,100 with genetic information. And so there's these differences between numbers because the collection is certainly still very dynamic. So if we're still collecting data, not everybody provides a sample, and there's always samples essentially queued in the lab, waiting to be screened and to be processed. So really the fundamental aim of SALSA was to build this resource that was available to make use of technologies that are available today, but also to be ready in a way for any new technologies that are coming down the line, or to enact on any discoveries that are made in the future. We want to be able to be ready to do that. And so as of the last census date, which was sort of the end of last year in December, we have 1,106 individuals who have this full complement of clinical information, biological samples, and genetic information. But to really put that into context, what I did do was I went to the ALS repository in the American Centre for Disease Control and Prevention and looked at their numbers, and they have about 1,617 individuals in their data set. So what is really reassuring is that the resource that SALSA and MiNDAUS is building is certainly comparable to what's happening internationally, and can also be well integrated with those other resources as well. So with data from over 1,000 cases now in SALSA, really the power and the usefulness of this resource is really starting to be realised. So we collect all types of motor neuron disease. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we have all different types of diagnoses, and this is just the distribution of those that we have. And this is really important because it shows that we're collecting across a range of these clinical phenotypes, and it's also very useful for the purposes of subtyping and also any kind of progression analysis that we do as well. As I mentioned, we collect these biological samples, and having this resource available allows certainly clinicians and researchers to follow up any sort of potential biomarkers that they might have, or gene discoveries, and also having samples collected longitudinally at multiple time points. If there are changes in the disease, we also have the opportunity to investigate those as well. So you can see here on the right-hand side, most of our samples that we've collected are about 18 months from onset of symptoms. But over the last few years, we've really tried to shift that to collect a set of samples that is closer to that onset of symptoms and closer to that time of disease diagnosis, so that we can, again, understand, we have the opportunity to understand, I guess, what is happening biologically in those very early phases of disease, so that perhaps we can use that information to perhaps look at ways that we can manage progression much more, in a better way and in a more personalized way for individual patients. So one of the defining features about motor neuron disease is this heterogeneity across patients. So we know that it presents differently in different people, it progresses at different rates in different people, and certainly the range of symptoms that people experience is also differs. And so what we're looking at here is the scores for the ALS functional rating scale. And so this is an instrument that's used to score the the progression of the disease in patients. And what you can see from this is that is, well, I don't think you really can actually draw any conclusions other than it is very different for different people. And what I'm showing you here is data for individuals where we have more than 2 points of information for those individuals. And so we've got about 800 people in this plot. So drawing any type of conclusions about this is very difficult. And ideally, we'd like to make some conclusions around subtyping or different types of personalized treatment, but that's kind of impossible when you're presented with this level of information. And so that's why it's very important for us to have this layers of data, both the clinical information and the genetic information, to really try and progress this understanding of this complex heterogeneity. So taking a subset of those individuals, and this is from the Queensland data, what we've done is we've tracked the individual disease progression, and that is important in terms of having the potential to improve patient management and also clinical trial recruitment. So what this shows is that scores over time for each individual, and it clearly confirms that the disease progression is very heterogeneous, with some individuals progressing very quickly and others progressing very slowly. And so what we did is, to further investigate this, we binned individuals into what's called slow, expected, or fast progressing for each year of their disease, and this is shown on the right-hand side. And this certainly highlights trends such as the decrease in fast progressors amongst individuals several years into their disease. But the only thing that we really can draw from this type of analysis is that this progression is not linear. And I just want to acknowledge that this is work done by Laura Zeiser in our group here at UQ. So to complement both the clinical data and the genetic information that we are generating, we also developed what was called a lifestyle and environmental risk factor questionnaire. And so with more research, I guess, being undertaken at the intersect of M&D biology and environmental exposures, it was really important to actually just collect the data. So we asked participants to complete this questionnaire around the time that they first enroll into SALSA, which in most cases is around the time of diagnoses, and includes questions across lifestyle behaviours, past medical history, diet, exercise, and risk exposures. So this is an online questionnaire, and so all the information collected is provided by our participants. And it also provides individuals in a very similar way to MiNDAUS with an opportunity to tell us anything about their M&D diagnosis and journey that they feel it's important to share. So it takes about 30 to 40 minutes to complete. And in some cases, people are unable to complete that themselves, and we certainly provide help to either complete it with a video call or do it over the phone, so that everybody can actually participate in this component of the SALSA protocol. So at this stage, we don't have any specific research questions to address, but it is important to start collecting the data. And so a couple of plots that I would like to share with you is just around asking participants about any other medical conditions that they may have had in their lifetime. And so this is a very comprehensive list of what we call ICD-10 codes, which is groups of diseases and disorders, and people are answering that information in terms of their lifetime medical history. We also ask here on the right-hand side about anything, any diagnoses or anything that you may have had in the 12 months leading up to your diagnosis. And we do know that in that period, it's also likely that people would have started to experience onset of symptoms. And a number of people are reporting, whether it be viral infections or major surgery, some onset of mental health disorders as well. So again, we just capture all of this information, which complements the clinical information that we're collecting when people see their neurologist. I guess something interesting that I wanted to show you was, what is your current smoking status? And this number here of about 55% of the cohort to date, and we have about 200 people that have answered this questionnaire who've endorsed that they have never smoked. And I just thought that was really interesting, because if we had asked this questionnaire maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'm guessing that number would have been a lot lower. And so it's just an interesting number to look at, sort of sign of the times, I think. So I have talked to you about the genetic information that we do generate. And so we take the DNA that from the blood samples, and we do this routine genetic screening. And what we're screening for is single nucleotide polymorphisms. And these are variants that are found across your genome. And looking at them across the genome and across chromosomes provides very informative information for M&D onset and progression. So we use very particular technology called microbead array technology, which also provides us with very detailed genetic information on 15 genes, which are shown here on the right-hand side, that are known to have an association with M&D. So in the data we have generated already, which I said was over data on over 1,000 people, and with each new batch of data, what we're seeing, these variants that have a positive association for MND are being replicated with the previous studies that had already been undertaken here in Australia, and also in studies overseas where the ancestry is predominantly Caucasian. So what this does, it gives us real confidence in the accuracy and quality of the data being generated, which can then also be merged with other genetic data sets around the world to increase our power to find the genetic variants and the biological pathways that they impact in motor neuron disease. So one sort of side project that the SALSA Consortium is supporting is the Magnet clinical trial. And the Australian arm of the trial is being led from the University of New South Wales under Professor Matthew Kiernan, and the SALSA infrastructure in terms of the genetic screening is supporting the screening of individuals, which is part of the inclusion criteria to be part of this trial. So there is a very specific variant that's associated with the UNC13A gene, and the C allele or the C version of this particular variant is associated with MND, with MND susceptibility, and also may underlie some differences in the treatment response. So this variant we target on our MND genetic screening panel, and we also know that this risk allele is associated with shorter survival, but also more extensive cognitive and cerebral involvement as well. So this clinical trial has, well, I guess to assess the feasibility of running this trial in Australia, SALSA was asked to screen all of the genetic data that we had already generated, looking for individuals that were actually carrying this particular C allele for this variant. And so we were able to do that because the data was available. And at that time where we provided the information to the lead site, we had about 141 cases that were positive for this particular genotype. Obviously at that time, some of those individuals would have passed on, and some of those individuals perhaps may have declined, so they no longer met the inclusion criteria. But what it really did was it established the feasibility of actually running this clinical trial in Australia, and that's always sometimes, well, that can sometimes be a really difficult thing to do, being so far south on the planet. So to date, we have undertaken screening of about 43 individuals from a number of sites across the country, but I think it's really a very sort of neat way and very sort of positive way that the SALSA Consortium is again supporting the MND research and clinical trials that are happening around the country. So one thing that we have built, and that is a SALSA website, and this is a public website. Anybody can go to this website. The address is in the top left-hand corner there. You can find all the information about the project, who we are, some of the other collaborations that we are working with, and also some of the publications that we're contributing to. And I'll just alert you to the bottom of this page. You can certainly sign up for SALSA updates. You can leave your email address and press submit, and we'll certainly be in touch with you as we make updates to the page, or if there is certainly news to share about the research itself. But one of the things that, again, just coming back to collecting the data, but also being able to present it very easily back to researchers and back to also care groups and support groups is what is in the resource, who's who, what does our resource look like in terms of, you know, males and females, what type of clinical phenotypes do they have, what type of information is available on them. And we've built this, what's called the SALSA Explorer. And so again, this is a public site. You can go and look at this site and you can filter on any number of variables to see how many of any particular group of individuals you're looking for, and and how much information is available on them. So we certainly don't put any individual data on this site. So this site meets all of our Australian privacy principles and our ethical approvals as well. But it provides summaries so that, again, it's about facilitating the research that's happening here in Australia, but also overseas as well. And so if you're interested in accessing the resource or having a look, I certainly encourage you to go to the site. So in terms of our collaborations and contributions, I think one of the key features about the SALSA consortium is that, and also with MiNDAUS, is that we're very conscious, and at the heart of it is we're very participant focused or patient centric in terms of our aims and our outcomes. So not only are we working with patients to find clinics and clinical trials and be involved in research programs, but also we are ensuring that the research that's done and that we're contributing to, that there are lots of efficiencies in that, and we're avoiding duplication, so that it allows flexibility in the research programs to go on and do really novel and cutting edge science without having to repeat a lot of what's already happening in this space. So over the last 5 to 7 years, we've been working with a number of groups around the country and supporting them in their research programs. But also a very important part is the public outreach that we do. And we're certainly involved in community events and tours, and also we're presenting a lot of our research at both, well, these sorts of forums, but also at national and international conferences. And so SALSA is certainly, in terms of its profile and along with MiNDAUS, I think people are, particularly overseas, are a lot more conscious and aware of this fantastic resource that we're generating here. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but I do want to share with you this is the scientific outputs or some of the publications that SALSA has been involved in. And I do just want to highlight just this paper here on the left-hand side, which was published in 2021. And SALSA contributed clinical and genetic data from about 467 cases to this international consortium led by the team at Utrecht Medical Centre in the Netherlands. And so this paper used whole genome genetic information from 29,000 MND cases to identify 15 risk loci that were also shared with multiple traits within the neurodegenerative spectrum. So though perhaps our overall contribution from SALSA was very small, what this really does reinforce is that the time that we're taking to ensure that our protocol is harmonised, not only across Australia, but also internationally, means that the data that we're collecting on our MND cases and the genetic data being produced can be directly compared and integrated with these data sets collected overseas. And on the right-hand side is just some examples of other papers where we have contributed SALSA data. So how can I participate? There are SALSA clinics, as I said, in all states in Australia. We don't have any clinics currently in Tasmania and Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory. If you are in one of those states that does have a clinic, but you're not attending that, you can certainly get in touch with your SALSA coordinator at each of the site. You can find all of that information on that SALSA website. Or you can certainly use the Contact Us page on the website. That message comes directly to me, and I can certainly put you in touch with the appropriate clinics to try and facilitate your participation in some way. We'd certainly encourage family or your friends to participate as well. SALSA needs controls. And so again, just going back to that very first aim about establishing a resource that was reflective of the Australian MND community, we also need the controls to also be reflective of the Australian community as well. So it's really important for us to collect controls. And also if you're participating in clinical trials, as with the magnet, you could also ask to be involved in SALSA as well. And that certainly is a way to participate and be involved in this great program. So where to from here? We certainly want to continue. And as Paul said, we're working very hard to try and fund these programs and to keep them going. We really want to make sure that we maximise everybody's contribution, both from their data and their biological samples, And certainly something I feel very strongly about is working out ways to reach out to people who are living with this diagnosis, who are in regional and remote parts of the country. We also want to make sure that we harness the opportunity that we have to integrate clinical data with the longitudinal set of samples that we're amassing, so collecting samples along the full course of the disease, and also extend using those samples in other ways in terms of looking at different omics ways and new technologies that are certainly coming down the line. And so with that, I'd really would like to thank all of the participants of SALSA to date. Like MiNDAUS, there are many, many people involved in making this project tick, and all the contributions that people make are certainly very much appreciated. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Anjali, and thank you to Paul for a great overview of those two brilliant studies that are collecting our data across Australia. Just a quick clarification that we had come through. I think Davaran at the moment has been recommended by the PBAC for being funded through the PBS, but they're still finalising the details. So I'm not sure. As far as I'm aware, Davaran is not yet available in Australia. So hopefully by the end of this year, it should be available to MND patients. Got a few questions lined up. So first up, I think some questions about MiNDAUS. So can you gave us some numbers on how many people are using it. What sort of percentage, what numbers of those patients are kind of updating it as well to provide you with that longitudinal data, Paul?
We think we're getting, of all the patients with MND in Australia, our aspiration is to get up to 85% case ascertainment. Very difficult to get 100% case ascertainment, and as such, you're really studying a cohort. In the clinics around, especially in Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, the clinics use, most patients that are attending the clinics are in fact at least registered and have one registration data set, which is a comprehensive data set. It enables us to phenotype the data. As that data matures, I'll give you examples from the legacy data set where, we had hundreds of patients have multiple different entries over time, which enabled us to map the progression of the disease, where it went to, what was affected. So the problem with case ascertainment is that you are relying on people to register. Now, at one point, Amanda was an opt-out registry. So the old database was opt-out. That is, if you didn't say you didn't want to participate, you were registered after 1 month, de-identified, of course. And of course, when you run an opt-out registry, your case ascertainment rate goes up into the high 90s. However, in today's world, because of data sharing and genomic analysis, you really do have to have consent in. So I don't think we'll ever go back to an opt-out registry for this disease, given where we are with therapies and the potential for collaborations, especially with genomics. It's important that you actually have informed consent to participate.
A question for both of you, actually. What about people from the Northern Territory? A question there. Obviously, there are definitely patients there, but there's no clinics in the Northern Territory that I'm aware of. So how do those patients get involved?
From my perspective, I think David Schultz in South Australia does attend Northern Territory, and those patients would be included in his clinic in South Australia. I haven't checked the postcodes in MiNDAUS yet to see how many patients from NT have been registered. But if they're seeing David Schultz, then they would be potentially registered.
Okay. And same with SALSA, or do you have
Yeah, so I guess the plan for SALSA was to really develop this regional and remote program, which means that actually people do not need to be attached to a clinic at all. And so that's certainly our plan. It would mean that people would need to engage with perhaps their, their GP or their consulting neurologist, and we would have some kind of relationship with many people and many sites. But to have a fixed clinic in the Northern Territory at the moment is difficult if we don't have the resources just to support one clinic. So whereas the regional remote program, I'm hoping we'll be able to capture everybody, and wouldn't matter where you are, you'd be able to participate.
Okay. And again, a question for both of you probably. What about looking at environmental causes? How, I mean, obviously you have the LERF study, and how is this all going to contribute to trying to work out what causes MND?
Sure. So yeah, so look, I think I guess I started working in M&D probably right at the end of 2014 when the Ice Bucket Challenge started. And that whole time, there certainly has been a lot of discussion around environmental exposures and contributions to onset of disease and progression of disease. And there is certainly research that's happening around Australia, but I think what's really important is that we need to collect the data. And so we really, in terms of the environmental information that we're collecting through SALSA, we certainly don't have the numbers yet to make use of that data in a powerful way. But what we're hoping, though, is that all of the questions that we are asking are relevant questions, and that, when people are filling them in, that they're actually really thinking about them, but also if we're not asking the right questions, to let us know. And so that's why those personal journey sections, both in the LERF questionnaire in SALSA and in MiNDAUS, are really important, because maybe we need to also be changing some of the questions that we're asking. So right now, from my perspective, I don't think we have in the LERF questionnaire enough information as yet, and we need to continue the data collection.
Just on that, there was a grant from the New South Wales government put up for analysis of MND around Orange in the Murray, along the Murray, to look at the possible toxins or causative factors for that. I don't know the outcome of that grant application, but it was very specific about looking for environmental factors that may be present where you see pockets of increased frequency of MND that are beyond what you would normally expect. So the other thing about environmental studies, there have been some environmental studies done in the United States that have been published many years ago, looking at pesticides and insecticides and all sorts of things. They are very specific studies that require very careful, controlled analysis and monitoring. And they're very expensive to run, to do them properly, to get a proper answer. So they're not things, unless we've got a very specific idea of a toxin, it's very hard to go fishing to find a toxin or a chemical or a substance that might be increasing the incidence. But it is something that is on people's minds. But it needs to be, the question needs to be a little bit more refined before you can mount an argument to get quite a lot of money, millions of dollars, to actually study it in the detail that would provide you with a good answer.
So as I understand it, then obviously the key to answering those very complex questions is numbers, lots and lots of people involved in the study. So it's relatively well set up to share genetic data. How easy is it to share data from registries around the world because there's obviously most countries, large countries have a registry. How easy is this just to try and lump all that data in together to try and pull out those common factors that might pop up?
It's not straightforward, and it's something that is being worked on. We certainly have shared data with the NCALS group, which is not about environmental factors. It's more about modelling the disease for their. It's data that'll help you decide who's going to progress quickly and who's going to progress slowly. So we certainly can do that. We're set up to do that. It is complex when you're sharing data internationally across borders, but it is possible. So we are aware of that. We've set it up. We've set our database up to be able to share data, and the way we've constructed the actual database itself. And, you know, even though our contribution to some of North America or Europe might be small, it's still valid. And it's certainly valid to validate what's being done internationally within the Australian population.
So I'll just, we'll sort of get towards the end now. So I'll leave you with the $2 million questions as such to finish up with. The first is, what do we need to do to get as many people as possible into these studies? What else can we do to make sure that we get to that 85% of patients enrolled and, you know, everyone is enrolling in SALSA at the same time? And the second part of that question is, how much money do you need to do all this?
So the first part of the equation from the clinical registry is to make the registry useful for patients and carers. And we spend a lot of time trying to do that. So if it's not useful to you, often why bother? But taking it more broadly, it does add information for the greater good. So we try and promote that. The other is, we haven't gone out and promoted widely because of our lack of ability or lack of funding, and we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. That's just as bad. And these type of registries, to run properly, probably cost in the vicinity of, you know, $500,000 to $600,000 a year just to run. If you want to enhance them, then you're talking about pockets of money of up to, you know, the same amount added onto that. So to run a registry effectively and communicate effectively and to publish effectively, you probably need about $500,000 a year at a minimum.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think to run both MiNDAUS and SALSA together is $1 to $1.2 million a year.
Yeah.
And that's to run all the 8 sites and to collect the data and to generate the genetic information, as well as run the regional remote program, which we would love to do.
I know that some of the perhaps less rare diseases have government funding to run their registries, so it would be fantastic, obviously, if the government would help out. We did ask in the last budget, but unfortunately they chose other priorities. But we will, all of us will keep trying for multitude of funding sources.
I think, Ethan, also we have to be creative. We have to think outside the box for this. It's very difficult to go to government with your hand out for a rare disease, and we have to be creative in the way we ensure funding. But and it makes it very difficult because the value of these registries is in their length of duration. Long-lived registries collecting data over time and sequentially on patients are going to provide answers for this disease, but we're really going to have to think outside the box of how they're actually funded, because it is notoriously difficult to get funding from government auspices for this type of work.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we've got through most of our questions, and we're obviously a bit over time as well. So thank you both, Anjali and Paul, for these fantastic insights into MiNDAUS and SALSA. And hopefully we've got a few more recruits tonight, and hopefully they'll spread the word amongst their networks as well, that everyone should be signing up for these initiatives, and there's something in it for you as well as in for the research world as well. The idea is that these are beneficial to everyone. So for everyone watching tonight, you'll get a link to the recording. Feel free to distribute this around your networks as well, and obviously you can rewatch it at your leisure if you think you could get some extra information. We've also got all the previous state of plays on our YouTube page as well, and they're all available on the MD Australia webpage. Keep an eye out for the research symposium that's happening at the end of August. Again, that is free to attend for anyone with lived experience, and you'll hear some of the best researchers in Australia and around the world speaking at that meeting. So I'd just like to say thank you again to Paul and Anjali, and thank you for everyone for coming along tonight, and we'll see you again for the next State of Play. Good night.
Thank you.